Hey, this is Danny here from Podcast Stories. Thanks so much for listening, and I'd love for you to get the latest episodes when they're released. So make sure to follow on your favourite podcast app or hop on over to podcasterstories.com/listen. If you enjoy the show and want to support it, you can do that at podcasterstories.com/support to join other supporters just like you. Thanks so much for being part of the Podcaster Stories community. And now, here's this week's episode.
Those kind of things we would deal with. We had our problems with substance abuse. We've had our problems with suicides. The whole spectrum of the human condition is what we had to deal with day in and day out. So as much as we want to have fun on the podcast, we take what experiences we had in the Air Force, and we examine some of the things that are going on in the military today. And, they're very, very serious subjects. We know we've talked also in that episode about the sexual assault scandal in San Antonio, Texas for the Air Force with the military training instructors. And, that was, those are the issues that a chief and a first sergeant would have to work every day. So we just incorporate that into our podcast because, a lot of our listeners relate to having to deal with the chief and the shirt, in some way, shape or form.
Hi, and welcome to Podcaster Stories. Each show will have a conversation with podcasters across all mediums and share their story, what motivates them, why they started their show, how they grew their show, and more. We'll also talk about their personal lives and some of the things that have happened that have made them the person they are today. And now, here's your host, Danny Brown. Hi, and welcome to another episode of Podcaster Stories, where we get to know the people behind the voices of the shows we listen to. This week, I have Jody Hanks and Chris Rash, who are the co-hosts of the Digression Podcast, a show about military news, history, and folklore. So, Jody, Chris, thanks for coming on the show. Welcome. How about I hand it over to you to give us a little bit of background on yourselves and the show?
Thanks, Danny. I really appreciate your letting us be here. I'm Jody Hanks.
And I'm Chris Rash.
Yeah, that's how the show normally opens. And so history, I guess. We're both retired Air Force guys. I'm retired Air Force medic. I actually started out in the dental career field, went into operations later on, and actually ended the career in dental. Retired Chief Master Sergeant. I had 24 years in the Air Force, and I'll turn that over to you, Chris.
And I'm career Air Force also, career aircraft maintainer. Spent 20 years working the flight line in the back shops. Actually did a tour in good old RAF Falconbury in the UK. So some of our listeners already know, and worked on the U-2 over there. From there, I went on to become a first sergeant, which is kind of a interesting position in the Air Force, where it's all about morale, welfare, and discipline. So instead of maintaining aircraft, I was maintaining people. And then from there, my first squadron was dental, where I met Jody. And then we really coalesced and gelled really well. And then I retired. I moved on after about 18 months. I moved on to security forces, a COP unit, and retired out of security forces about a year and a half, I think, after Jody retired.
And is that where, so obviously you've known each other for a good few years, is that where the idea for the show came up, or was it later?
Well, we started the show back in dental. We just didn't think to record it until 10 years later.
Yeah, that's kind of what it was. Yeah, we'd sit in my office, and in the morning we were drinking coffee, in the afternoon we were drinking Scotch, and and the podcast was
and
kind
lunch
of born.
It was sake.
Yeah, sometimes it was, and. So the podcast was born out of the conversations that, we used to have, just kind of sitting in there. And the digression comes up because that's kind of what the conversations went to. They, would normally start about something serious, something operational, something that actually had to do with the job. And then it just kind of, went off on tangents, asides, we would digress into other stories. Oh yeah, that reminds me. Let me talk about this. I mean, sometimes we talked about bunny rabbits.
Yeah, we did, and I think also what also pushed the idea of the podcast was we had a young, very powered up young lady in our squadron that she would always jokingly ask, but she was inquisitive as to what we would always talk about in the office behind closed doors. Because she wanted to know what, the senior non-commissioned officers, what were they dealing with? Because she was looking at her own path and her own career and what were we talking about? Well, it turns out it wasn't usually anything that she thought we'd be talking about. Right. So we put the podcast together and as a way to kind of, get a peek behind the curtain as to what was going on back in the day. We did have to work on some very serious issues. However, we found that, having the digressions during those conversations really helped us, congeal together as a team and help our team work out quite a bit when we had to work those serious issues.
Yeah, when you look at the backgrounds, I mean, we're a pretty unlikely pair, I think.
Yeah, we really are.
And you'd mentioned, obviously, you record with coffee, but you publish with Scotch. And I noticed that in your bios on the website that you both enjoy a good Scotch, which I think I'm Scottish myself, so obviously I'm a single malt guy. And my favourites are the whiskies, like the peaty whiskies from the Isle of Islay. What's your go-to Scotch? Or do you have one or two? Or?
Well, my favorite's Glengoyne, and so kind of a Highland. So, and I think Glengoyne's just a lot smoother, and it doesn't. A lot of Scotches have kind of that burnt peaty taste to it. Glengoyne still has the peaty taste without that kind of burnt taste to it. Also, like Glenmorangie, I had a glass of that once that was, or recently I had a bottle of that was, and it was cured in port barrels, and it actually had a little purple color to it, and there was a little, the finish was kind of sweet, tasted like port, and it was very good, very good. But yeah, Glengoyne's my favorite.
My favorite Scotch is usually whatever Jody's handing me because I'm not as well versed in Scotch as he is. But I did used to keep a bottle of Talisker in my desk, and that really proved who I used that as a litmus test of who I could trust and who I probably wasn't going to trust. Because if they couldn't bear that, because that Scotch that'll light you on fire.
Gosh. Yeah.
And so anyway, that's kind of. I'm right there with Jody. So
now, I know you mentioned that you've been doing the show for a while now, and it's only maybe in the last few years that you started, doing it from a recording point of view. As that show has grown, what's been the biggest challenge that you've faced over the history of the show, and how did you kind of overcome that?
It was definitely from my end. It was tech. We were always having problems with some sort of connection because Jody's in Florida and I'm in Virginia, and for whatever reason, when we first started, we could barely get through an episode without having to go back and redo the whole thing because of whether it was Skype or whether it's because we were trying out different platforms, and then whatever connection, it always seemed to be on my end that we were having problems, and now we've got that pretty much worked out. So
yeah, that was probably the biggest challenge, and we tried every platform. We use Skype, we use Zoom, we use Zencaster. We finally settled on Squadcast. It's been pretty reliable. I mean, and it's a great platform, and it's good to be able to see the people that you're talking to. It makes a big difference. I know that's not as important to me, but I know that Chris is more relaxed when you can actually see people that he's talking to. So.
I think it makes the conversation flow much more naturally. Yeah. You see those visual cues, and especially when we're interviewing people, because when you can see they're about to say something or chime in. So.
And I think that's a good point you mentioned about the fluidity of it with the visual cues, because sometimes it's hard to tell a nuance of a question or a comment or something if it's audio only, and then you've got that awkward pause and you're thinking, did I just insult that person with something that I shouldn't have said or whatever?
Guilty.
So it's nice to see there's still a sparkle in their eyes are okay with that.
That's true.
You're on what, episode 34 now, I believe.
34.
Has the experience lived up to your expectations when you were first thinking about taking the podcast from, say, your personal discussions onto a more public forum where other people can now listen in and see what you guys are made of?
Started kind of as an experiment, and we did one podcast a month for about the first year, just to kind of feel our way through it, and we changed things up with almost everything. So if you go back and listen to the early episodes, you'll hear huge variations in the audio quality of the podcast. I don't think they're bad, but we're doing a whole lot better now, and I think right now there's more production that's done in them now. There's a lot more forethought that's put into it. I think that's probably the biggest change that we've made, or the transition that we've made. And we're bringing in guests now and talking to them and letting them, interact in the show, which is a lot of fun as well. Chris, what do you think?
The thing that I when we first started, I was wondering, were we going to ever run out of, things to talk about? And I mean, we'd had conversations for 10 years on the phone, but would we run out of things that were interesting enough that other people would want to listen to? And well, I mean, we haven't been doing this for, a decade yet, but it doesn't seem like we ever run out of anything to look into or to discuss or dissect. And the feedback that we get is that, people love what we're talking about. So, we're going to keep pressing. That's
the best part, is the, people that engage with the show, the feedback that you get and the questions that they ask. We try to, at the end of the show, cover the feedback that we're getting, just to share that and answer questions. And that's probably the most fun, I think, having other people engage with the show.
And I think that probably comes across as well, because you've known each other for so long, and you're friends, and you do certain things together. There's that camaraderie there that sort of often some shows can maybe miss or doesn't quite have, because it's still two separate people that are doing a show together, if you like. And I think that can make a big difference. And to your point, Chris, keep the topics going, even when you think, we've been doing this for like 5, 6, 7 years or whatever. At some point, it's going to stop. And, clearly when two friends get together, even if you've not seen each other for 10 years, you're just sort of kind of drop back into that moment.
Well, I got to give credit to Jody, because there's a lot of times that I'll be like, hey, we should do a podcast. And he's like, we did, episode 22. I'm like, oh, really?
It's hard not to tell the same war stories over and over again. You get into that habit.
So. Now, you mentioned obviously the show, it's called a Digression Podcast, because you tend to, go with the flow, whatever's happening at that time and in the conversation. And as I mentioned, you can tell the camaraderie is there, the humour, and not quite taking yourself seriously at times, depending on what the conversation is. But I like the fact that you also go into very serious topics. You're not afraid to tackle serious topics and tougher topics. You've got the Chief Master Sergeant Juan Lewis, who was talking about his battle with coronavirus. And recently you looked at, I think there was a couple of shows on the same topic, where you're digging into the amount of soldier deaths and the growing number of soldier deaths through either suicide, murder, illness, etc. How important is it for you? I mean, was it always that was always a goal with the show, or does that come along as you've grown? And how important was it for you to be able to tackle these topics and show that side of the show, if you like?
Well, for me, I mean, those are the kind of things that we talked about anyway. And, outside the show, we may be, we were talking about Fort Hood, for example, all the deaths at Fort Hood. And the more we, got into it while we were, just, talking over the phone, it's like, okay, well, we should do a podcast on this. And every other podcast, we do the current news, right? Military news items. And it was a news show. That was a news day. And it was just one. So it was just one news topic, and it was, the deaths at Fort Hood. We actually brought in a retired Sergeant First Class from the Army who used to be stationed at Fort Hood, and he was a tank guy, to talk with us on that one and provided some perspective that two old Air Force guys can't provide, because we didn't live that same life.
Jody's absolutely right. And what helps us with that is, our perspective. We were part of a triad at the top of the squadron. You had the commander, you had Jody the chief, and you had me as the first sergeant. And the personnel issues that we would deal with, well, Fort Hood's a great case study of what the triad would have to deal with and cope with. So it was natural for us to talk about it. And with our point of view, although, like Jody says, it was Air Force point of view. That's why we brought in Sergeant First Class Bartow. But those kind of things we would deal with. We had our problems with substance abuse. We've had our problems with suicides. The whole spectrum of the human condition is what we had to deal with day in and day out. So as much as we want to have fun on the podcast, we take what we experiences we had in the Air Force, and we examine some of the things that are going on in the military today. And they're very, very serious subjects. We know we've talked also in that episode about the sexual assault scandal in San Antonio, Texas for the Air Force with the military training instructors. And, that was, those are the issues that a chief and a first sergeant would have to work every day. So we just incorporate that into our podcast because, a lot of our listeners relate to having to deal with the chief and the shirt, in some way, shape, or form.
Have you found that people listening to these particular episodes, for example, have been able to be more comfortable in coming forward and talking about either their own issues or reporting issues that they may not have had the confidence to do otherwise because they're showing that it is being talked about, it is okay to talk about it, and it is an issue that needs spoken about? Have you had feedback from, people still serving in the military or post-military that have listened to these episodes?
I don't know that we've had anybody that has come out and, like it made them want to come forward with, something that they were dealing with in their life or in their past or anything. But the feedback that we get for the most part is specifically commenting on the episodes and drawing questions out of there and making maybe a correlation between their service and what's happened. We've had a few just commenting on what's going on in the world today, but we haven't had anything really deep. I don't think that we can. I can't think of anything. We used to talk about tens of listeners. We're at hundreds of listeners now. So, maybe as we grow a little further, we'll have some deeper discussions and feedback from folks. It'll be interesting.
Now you're on currently, is it episode 34 you've got published at the moment, I believe?
Correct.
Over the time of the show, are there any episodes that have stood out to you in particular? And if so, why that one or why that two or etc.?
Probably the two that strike me in my mind, probably our first one, to have the guts to put it out there. And then I think our most significant podcast was the one we did not this past summer before, the 50th anniversary of the Apollo moon landing. We worked really hard on that episode, and it came out it was a long episode, and I really enjoyed listening to it myself when I went back to review it. I'm like, oh wow, you could see the work that we put into it, and I'm particularly proud of that one.
Yeah, we did a lot of research for that, I think, and there were aspects about that topic. I mean, Chris's dad actually, he was a scientist, and he worked on moon rocks that were brought back from the moon. So, I mean, Those kind of things. My dad was in the Navy and was on the carrier that picked up the Apollo 8 astronauts. So, there was, that kind of, personal aspect to the story as well. And I think that, that had some meaning.
And speaking of that connection, I mean, that's really cool to have that connection, that personal connection to such an important piece of history. Because you've got that connection, does it anger you at times when you get the conspiracy theorists that say it never happened, it was all recorded in a studio, blah, blah? Or do you just think, you know what, I'm not even going to get involved with this?
It's funny that you mentioned that because I just watched Capricorn 1 just a couple of weeks ago with my son. And I don't know if you're familiar with the movie. It's got James Brolin in it, and but it's about a faked Mars landing, right? They did it in a sound studio, and so it's the same kind of thing. But no, I don't get angry at the ridiculous arguments that people make, the flat earthers, but it's funny to talk about it though. Yeah,
I think Jody and our sense of humor is, when people want to give us feedback, like and say, that conspiracy theory, we kind of enjoy it because we've actually done a few episodes on the conspiracy
UFOs
theory. Our second and third ones talking about UFOs and rabbits.
That's the folklore
all sorts
part.
Of crazy.
Yeah.
So we enjoy that. I don't get upset about if they don't think that that the moon landing happened because that's their thing, and I just know that I saw the stuff that Dad had from when he would go to the lab out in Livermore, California. He brought back his little clean suit and everything like that, and I'm like, well, that's got to be a heck of a conspiracy if they're issuing gear for a fake So
that's right.
But yeah.
It's funny you mentioned the Flat Earthers, Jody. I saw like a little meme on Facebook where there was a Flat Earther Society or something like that, and they'd run a poll, and they said the results are in. People all around the globe have spoken. And the first comment underneath was, just reread what you just posted.
Right.
Like, perfect.
Oh, that's excellent.
But one of the things I'd like to talk to you about, and I know, Jody, you'd mentioned when we were speaking earlier, prior to today's recording, is the work that you guys did at the Keesler Air Force Base. And is it Biloxi, Mississippi?
Biloxi, Mississippi, yeah.
Yeah, and this was following Hurricane Katrina, correct?
Correct.
Yeah, and obviously, I mean, that was a devastating impact across America with that particular hurricane. What happened there? How did you guys get involved, and what was going on at the time there?
Well, Hurricane Katrina hit the coast there. It kind of churned. It was a Category 5 and just churned there for a while and devastated the whole Gulf Coast area there. And they almost, or the Pentagon was talking about closing Keesler because of the damage that was done to the base. Keesler has a regional medical center, so a very big hospital on there. And when Katrina hit, I was actually on my way to Korea. I spent a year at Korea before I actually came to Keesler. I think Chris was at Nellis, right? Chris was at...
Yep, I was in Vegas.
And he went to First Sergeant School before he ended up coming there. But right after Katrina, I mean, it was... The conditions were austere. They were working out of tents. They actually ran the hospital out of tents. It was a lot like being deployed overseas, to some remote location where you didn't have a lot of support, a lot of equipment. You were rebuilding things. So when we got there, which was just about a year later, the coast was still decimated. Houses, still hadn't been rebuilt or building even started. There were a lot of foundations that were just foundations sitting there.
Yeah, just slabs
sitting there. And on the hospital, they were back into physical buildings, but a lot of things weren't operational. A lot of people that evacuated for the hurricane, they never came back. Right, so they didn't bring people back in. They sent them to other bases just because of the base was in limbo at the time. So Manning, we both went into the dental squadron. I had a dental background. I was the chief there, and this is the largest dental squadron in the Air Force. It's got a huge dental lab. They do provide advanced education for dentists, so that it's like a graduate program for dentists and all the dental specialties and things like that. Anyway, Manning was between 60, 70%, and morale was low. The unit there had not won an award in years, and here comes me, fresh from Korea, and then here comes this knuckle dragger maintainer, first sergeant. That's that kind of put everybody off, and we just started rebuilding the personnel there. Not the building or anything, but the team at the center. By the time that we left, it was actually the winningest. It was the winningest dental organization in the command, in Air Education and Training Command, which we were part of, and it was over a 2-year span of time, and it was working, getting there in the trenches and raising up the performance level, the morale level of the troops that served there, and it was a lot of fun. A lot of black flag runs, which is runs in the very hottest part of the day. Standing out in the parking lot, clapping, singing the Air Force song, those kind of things. So, anyway, I don't want to monopolize that, Chris.
Good times. Keesler was still so, lack of a better term, hammered when we got there that my wife was 8 months pregnant, and my son had to be born in Mobile, Alabama, because there was just not any, they didn't have a NICU. They had a L&D ward, but they did not have a neonatal ICU in case he needed it. So they kicked us off to Mobile, to a civilian hospital. And it took us all but till about when he was born to find a house that we could live in, because there just weren't any. They were all destroyed. So Jody still is in horror that we lived in a really old ramshackled RV or what your listeners would probably know as a caravan. And it was old, and it leaked, and
it was a piece of crap.
It was almost out of the rain. Yeah, it was a big piece of crap. But it did its job for what we needed to do.
It was dropping car parts on the highway as it was.
Oh, yeah, that's not lying. I blew a tire like nobody's on the way there. But anyway, I digress. So we had a big challenge of not just setting that base back up again, but getting it back to what people would consider normal functions. And that was hard because most of the folks lost everything. I mean, literally everything. And I remember going through I was rearranging the office, doing something, and a check fell out for one of our civilian dentists from the Red Cross. I'm like, what's this doing? You're like, 2 years later, this check falls out, and I'm like, and now it's all expired. And now I even feel worse because now I found it. And I'm like, so you realized how much people needed that assistance at the time, because they literally lost everything but maybe their car. So it was far more difficult than I was expecting to have to deal with it. Just thought, we're going to another base. That hurricane happened a long time ago. No, the place was still pretty well. A lot of our buildings are still closed. So we had to, like our base finance office, that's where my wife worked. It had to be put into a whole different building because the building it used to be in had the entire first floor was underwater. I mean, the whole base was flooded because the front gate of the base is 250 yards from the beach. So the water just rolled straight into the from both sides. It's kind of an isthmus. So the back bay flooded the back end of the base. The front, the storm surge took that. So. And then we had two more hurricanes while we were there. So we had Gustav and Ivan back to back. So we had even more damage. It was quite a challenge to start off with, and we had to work so hard, and that's where all this came together. Is the time we spent working the issues and trying to put that base back together, just building people up.
And you mentioned that a lot of it, especially when you arrived there, morale was so low, and a lot of that to get the buildings and the work that you needed to do, you had to get the morale, of the people there. How do you go about something like that when there's been such a devastation? People aren't sure what's coming next. How do you go in and try fix that, or do fix that, obviously?
Well, here's a great example. And not long after we got there, we did have a young airman who was graduating from Airman Leadership School. And it's the first phase of professional military education that an airman goes through. It's a big deal. And his supervisors, the commander, everybody normally attends these graduation ceremonies, especially for these folks going through their first one. Well, the only people from the squadron that were at this ceremony were Chris and I. And his supervisor wasn't there, his commander wasn't there, nobody else in the facility was there. His wife and his mom were there. So I was actually kind of embarrassed. So that was actually the first thing that we did. We actually changed the what do we call those, cheers?
Yeah, the Squadron cheer.
They had this lame cheer. Whenever you go to events, each organization, each squadron or whatever, they have a cheer, whatever their organization is. And this one, for this one was Dental Pride, Smile Wide. And it drew more laughs and chuckles than anything. And this is a war fighting, that's what these folks are essentially. So we changed that night to if you can't bite, you can't fight. I think that was the first step in the right direction. And more than anybody else, I think Chris and I were probably the loudest yelling that in the center. So just kind of letting people know that, hey, here we are. And, we're going to start making changes now. The next day, got all the senior NCOs in the organization together, all the senior non-commissioned officers, and sat them down and said, hey, why were me in the shirt? The only people there at his graduation yesterday. This is totally ridiculous. Where were you people? How are you going to lead, these folks forward if you can't support them, when they want you to, when they need you to support them. But anyway, that was the first step, and then just gradually over time.
Well, and then the other part of it, what we built on top of that was, we had a lot of personnel issues and a lot of problems, people having problems with life. And when I would, I'm the first sergeant is the one that gets the call in the middle of the night. Hey, Airman Snuffy's been in a car accident or has been arrested or what have you. And I had an incident where a young airman was in trouble in the dormitory, and her actual suite mate, the young lady that shared the bathroom with her in the dormitory, started texting me. And so I called that supervisor up and said, hey, meet me at the dorms. And we started realizing really quick that the first line supervisors are like, what? And got a lot of, no, that's the first sergeant's job. I just take care of them at work. And so we had to, completely retool the way our frontline supervisors and our mid-level non-commissioned officers dealt with the people. Because if, they needed to know not only that where that their airmen lived in the dorm, but also what room, how to get there. And we built on top of that, and we kept building pride and pride and pride. But I think the thing that really, one of the most key elements that we fixed was, of course, in the military unit, they measure fitness, physical fitness. And our rate was terrible. And we got there, and, Jody talked about the black flag runs. Well, we decided that we need to start providing time during the duty day for our folks to get out there and get some fitness, because they weren't doing it on their own. So we implemented the policy, and actually some of our doctors were like, hey, wait a minute, it's black flag conditions. We can't run in black flag. And my point of view was, the worst day in Biloxi, Mississippi is a nice day in the desert. So we're going to run. And there was a lot of grumbling, a lot of people moaning and groaning. A whole slew of new fitness waivers came out. Because people just didn't want to do it. But eventually what happened is we started getting more and more people off we'd have to go to the base command, and there'd be slides of, how many people in this squadron were failing. And our number kept every month kept shrinking and shrinking and shrinking. And suddenly we were one of the best on the base. And they're like, what are you doing? In fact, we were better, we had better fitness rates than security forces, than the cops at the time. And you think cops must need to be physically fit because their job, requires them to run and catch bad guys and stuff. We eclipsed them, and people started to notice. And, that we had people from the other squadrons, other first sergeants were coming to me going, hey, what are you doing over there? And wanting to know because, and once our folks started getting off the program, and what we would do is we'd go run, not only we'd run in the squadron runs, but we'd go run with them individually. Somebody's having a problem, hey, let's go after work, and when they saw that we were willing to do that leading from the front and actually caring about them, things got better. People were proud. They didn't walk around, and when people ask them, hey, what squadron are you in? Oh, dental. They're like, no, dental. And they're like, oh, you're the guys that are kicking butt on everything, whether it's awards or fitness or what have you. So I think those two things were pretty key in my mind.
Agree.
And now you're both retired now. It sounded like from your time, especially obviously at Keesler and what you did there, it sounds like there was maybe some process issues, or whether it was like higher up didn't care as much. Do you hear from friends that are still enlisted that it's got better, or did you recognise it before you retired that things have got better, or is that something that's still ongoing? Maybe not even just in the Air Force, but just generally, what's happening there?
The leadership, at least at the base level, that usually rotates over every 2 years. So there's a lifespan there, and even in the squadron, it's usually 2 to 3 years. So there's kind of an oscillation between good and bad, and throughout my career I've had good commanders, bad commanders, and they oscillate. So that oscillation hasn't changed much, but I know that I've gotten feedback that some of our folks, they really missed having us around, because the people that followed us either had a different point of view or were not as engaged, or And the thing was, like with fitness, when it came to, fitness is, has never been my greatest friend. I did it because I had to. And it was one of the reasons I became a first sergeant, because I didn't look like, G.I. Joe or, somebody that was a Navy SEAL or in the SAS. It just, I didn't. I never have. You look at my whole family, we don't look like that. But what I wanted to show them is, with a lot of hard work and determination, you could do anything in the Air Force. And when somebody was having a problem, getting in and investing that time in them. And then, but also walking the walk. There were a lot of times where it would have been easy for Jody and I, because we would have myriads of meetings over and over in different places throughout the week or the duty day. We made sure that folks saw that if we missed the squadron run, they saw us at the end of the day heading out we had a running track called I-81, heading out to I-81 to make sure that we didn't miss it, so that they knew we were walking the walk. And so I got feedback that, they missed that kind of personal touch, and they missed that involvement. I know both Jody and I, even 10 years later, we still hear from people from time to time. They'll ask for advice and what have you, because they're just not hearing the answer that they may want, or that they think that they should be getting. Not that their leadership isn't doing their job. It's just different than the way we did it, and they like the way we did it.
Now, you're as we mentioned earlier, you're on episode 34 at the moment, and you've been doing it for a few years now. What are your goals for the future of the show? Are you continuing to, obviously keep the format of this, but do you have any plans to expand to different areas, or, do more guests, or what's your goals there, do you think?
Well, we're definitely, expecting that, $200 million Joe Rogan contract from Spotify any minute.
Yeah. Wait, they're on. Let me check.
Any minute.
Messages. Okay. Not yet. We end the show with the same little phrase that we say every time, and it's we stand for nothing, and sometimes we can't even stand. And what that is, we just don't take things too seriously, right? We don't take ourselves too seriously. We cover serious topics, but, we don't, this is not, as long as this is fun and we're enjoying what we're doing, I think that we'll continue. We're doing things now that we didn't consider doing when we first started, the interviews and, bringing people in and, engaging in that way, building a Facebook presence and those kind of things. So it's kind of wherever the wind takes us when it comes to it. The conversations are still the same. The discussions are still the same. The topics, we talk about those things anyway. It's just, remembering to press the damn record button.
That happened once or twice.
Speaking for an hour, then there's nothing there.
That's right. Well, and the bloopers and things like that are fun too, because I'll normally throw those in the back, in between. If you listen to the music at the end, sometimes we'll just cut it, and whatever, big blooper there was in the show that day, we'll just put it in there.
Yeah.
And then you mentioned, obviously, hit record. That's like a basic error. Don't not hit record. So as podcasters that have grown your show, and have been doing it for a while now, what one piece of advice would you give to someone that's thinking of starting a podcast? Don't worry so much about the equipment, because if you do the research, you look at the YouTube videos. There's all kinds of there's master classes and things like that you see out there. Get you something simple, whatever your budget allows at that time, and start. You can do a podcast now on your phone, using the Anchor app. Just start. And enjoy what you're doing. You'll learn. There's plenty of people that you can ask questions to online. I know that the things that we were doing at the beginning, as far as, or things that I was doing, I edit the shows. I've learned a lot, in these 2 years. What we put out now is a lot better, just based on what I know now. And would I have rather the early shows sound, like the shows that we put out now? Certainly, but we would have waited 2 years to do it. So just start. Start. Have a good time.
And I would say that, our podcast, like we said before, is just us deciding to record a conversation we would normally have anyway. Jody and I have always relished a great conversation and interesting topics and getting off on tangents. That's just been our thing since we got together. And so we brought it into a podcast because, well, we're passionate about having a great conversation. So that's my advice is find something you're really passionate about. Don't worry about whether it's going to sell, whether anybody's going to be interested in it or not. Find something that you're interested in and run with it. And, it's like the old movie line. If you build it, they will come. And they have.
Right.
So.
And that's awesome. I like the fact that you mentioned, just get on and experiment. Because I think, as you say, a lot of the time it can be seen as a very technical, endeavor, because you have to get the right mic and the right, equipment, the right recording interface, etc., blah, blah, blah. But you don't. Just, as you say, just speak, get comfortable, and let it go, I think.
Right. And, I've listened to podcasts for years. And, some of them are, you can tell that they were done in studios. And, some of them, you can hear the reverb, you can hear, it's not the greatest, but as long as the content is good, as long as, the folks on it are genuine, I think people are forgiving of those things. As long as they like what you're saying, as long as they like the message, as long as they like the story you're telling, they're going to listen to you. I don't think it's never going to be perfect. so don't wait to do it. Don't think you have to make it perfect.
And just use a laptop and a microphone in your closet, because all the clothes will absorb all the echo.
Exactly.
Well, yes, that's true.
Perfectly, I think what's the phrase? Perfectly imperfect. Like people use. That's awesome. So Jody, Chris, I've really enjoyed having you on the show today.
Hey, before we go, we want to give a shout out to Jen. Jen's our research assistant. So hey, Jen.
Hi, Jen.
Hey, Jen.
No, for sure. But no, I really enjoyed having you on the show today. I appreciate your time. And I know I've been catching up on some of your episodes since obviously we connected a few weeks back, probably a couple of months back, actually. And I can attest to the fact that it is a fun show to listen to. As Jody and Chris mentioned, there are serious topics on there, obviously, but the back and forth between you two guys is really cool. And it's almost like I'm a guest at you're getting together for a scotch or a couple of beers in your backyard, and I've come across, but I just brought the beers. I'm just sitting there, and you guys are chatting away. So I enjoy the show immensely because of that back and forth.
Well, thanks, Danny.
Excellent. That's exactly what we're going for.
We really appreciate that.
So for people that want to check the show out for themselves and maybe connect with you online, where's the best place that people can find you?
It's thedigressionpodcast.com. So the name of the podcast is The Digression Podcast, and we're on all of the players. So Apple Podcast and Spotify and Amazon Music now, and so we're on all of those. But we have a Facebook page. We do a little bit on Twitter. We do some on Instagram at DigressPod, the same name for all three of them. And but our webpage is thedigressionpodcast.com.
Okay, and I'll be sure to leave all the links for these for the website and the social networks in the show notes. So if you're listening to this on your favorite podcast app, make sure to hop on down to the show notes, and you'll find all the details there. So as I mentioned, Jody, Chris, I really appreciate you on the show today, and we'll look forward to listening to more of your adventures in the weeks ahead.
Thanks, Danny. This was great.
Thanks.
So this has been another episode of Podcaster Stories. If you'd enjoyed this week's show, be sure to check out other episodes over at podcasterstories.com or on your favourite podcast apps like Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts or Spotify, etc. Until the next time, take care and we'll speak soon.